The most dangerous prison is the one you cannot see. It is built not of walls, but of ideas. You walk freely while locked inside a role. You call it yourself, you defend it. Yet it was never you. There's a version of you shaped by fear and approval. It smiles when it wants to scream. It nods when it longs to refuse. It builds a life from the outside in. And one day, it feels unbearably empty. Carl Jung understood that the self can disappear beneath a mask. The tragedy is not wearing the mask. It is forgetting it exists. The false self survives by convincing you there is nothing beyond it to find. The lie is dangerous because it feels familiar. You have lived with it for years. It speaks in your voice. It makes your choices. It directs your dreams. And as long as you never question it, it owns you completely. The false self does not feel false when you are inside it. It feels like home because you have lived there too long. Its walls are made of habits. Its windows show only what fits the story you have learned to tell. From childhood, you practiced the lines that kept you safe. You learned the expressions that earned approval. Over time, the performance became automatic. You stopped noticing the mask because it fused with your skin. The invisibility of the false self is its greatest strength. You cannot resist what you cannot see. You cannot remove what you believe is natural. This is why most people live and die without ever meeting their real self. Carl Jung believed the unconscious holds the truth we cannot see. The mask lives in the conscious world, where it thrives on attention. The real self waits in the depths, patient yet hidden, until the moment you dare to look inward. The false self begins as a survival strategy. As a child, you read the room. You sensed what was welcome and what was dangerous. You adjusted not because you were weak, but because your safety depended on it. In homes where emotions were punished, you hid your feelings. In places where achievement was valued, you performed excellence. In moments where silence kept the peace, you swallowed your voice. Survival taught you the art of disappearing in plain sight. Over time, the strategy became identity. You forgot the adjustments were temporary. You began to believe the edited version of yourself was the whole story. But survival is not living. It is a holding pattern, a pause in the true unfolding. Carl Jung knew the persona has its place. It protects you in hostile environments, but when the danger passes, you must shed it. If you keep wearing the armor in peacetime, it becomes a prison built from your own caution. Every child enters the world with an unfiltered self. There is no mask, no performance, only raw expression. But very soon, the child learns that some parts of this expression bring smiles, while others bring disapproval or punishment. Approval becomes a currency. Safety feels tied to being pleasing. The child adapts, trimming away what seems unwanted, amplifying what brings praise. This is not deceit but instinct. It is the natural intelligence of a being that wants to belong. Over time, the child begins to measure their worth by reactions. Laughter feels like acceptance. Silence feels like rejection. They shape themselves around these responses until the authentic voice becomes faint and the constructed voice speaks louder. Carl Jung understood that this adaptation is the seed of the persona. In its early form, it is protective. But left unchecked, it grows into the false self, a version built entirely on the fragile foundation of other people's approval. The mask begins as protection. It is the face you wear to avoid harm, to earn care, to stay connected. In dangerous or unpredictable environments, it becomes the difference between acceptance and isolation, between being heard and being ignored. It learns quickly. It copies the tone, the expressions, the words that keep peace. It hides anger when anger is unsafe. It hides sadness when sadness is unwelcome. It presents only what the world is ready to receive without threat. In this role, the mask is not an enemy. It is a loyal servant to survival. But like any tool, its usefulness depends on knowing when to put it down. Many never do. They mistake the tool for the self. Carl Jung warned that over time the persona can become fused with identity. What once shielded you now limits you. The armor becomes a cage, the protection becomes suffocation, and the self beneath begins to wither from lack of air. A role played once is performance. A role played every day becomes identity. You repeat the same responses, the same expressions, until the line between acting and being disappears. What began as choice becomes an unconscious script. Over time, others reinforce the role. They respond to the version of you they know, not the one you truly are. Their recognition feels comforting. It feels like belonging. But it is belonging to a character, not to your whole self. The danger is that the role fits so well it feels natural. You no longer question its origin. You forget that before this role, there was another you, one who did not need to measure every action against the expectations of others. Carl Jung observed that when the persona dominates, the true self retreats. It does not vanish, it waits. The moment of awakening begins when you notice the gap between how you act and what you actually feel in the quiet of your own mind. You achieve the goals, earn the titles, collect the rewards, yet the feeling of fullness never arrives. There is applause but no satisfaction. The milestones feel hollow because they were reached in service of an image, not your truth. This emptiness is not failure, it is feedback. It is the soul reminding you that success built on the wrong foundation cannot nourish. No amount of recognition can fill the absence of being disconnected from your own essence. You may try to outrun the feeling by achieving more. You may add new goals, new possessions, new experiences. But the hunger remains because it is not for more. It is for something real. It is for yourself. Carl Jung believed that the true self is the source of vitality. When you live from the false self, energy leaks. You are always performing, always managing perception. And performance without authenticity eventually leaves you exhausted and empty. When you live from the false self, your sense of worth rises and falls with the opinions of others. A compliment can lift your mood for hours. A criticism can crush it for days. You become hostage to the shifting winds of approval. This dependence feels normal because it has been there so long. You learned early that love and safety came as rewards for good performance. Now you measure your value by the reactions you receive rather than the truth you carry within. The problem is that external validation is never stable. People's attention drifts. Their preferences change. No matter how perfectly you perform, you cannot hold their approval forever. The false self fears this and works endlessly to prevent it. Carl Jung saw this cycle as a form of self-abandonment. You trade your inner authority for external permission. The true self is steady because it is rooted in being, not in reception. It does not beg to be valued. It knows it already is. The false self believes rest is a prize, not a right. You cannot relax without first proving you deserve it. Every pause feels like stolen time. Every quiet moment stirs guilt because you measure worth by constant productivity. This compulsion comes from years of conditioning. As a child, you may have received praise only when achieving something. Rest was allowed only after visible effort. Over time, you internalize the rule. Value is tied to output, never to simple existence. Living this way exhausts the body and starves the soul. True rest nourishes creativity, clarity, and joy. But the false self fears rest because it interrupts the performance, and without performance, it does not know who it is. Carl Jung taught that the self is not defined by doing, but by being. To reclaim rest without guilt is to reclaim a piece of your true identity. It is a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of the mask. You can be surrounded by people who love you and still feel unseen. They know the version of you that is easy to love. They do not know the hidden parts. The parts you never risk showing for fear of rejection. This creates a quiet loneliness. You are present, but not fully here. Every conversation stays within safe boundaries. Every connection rests on the unspoken agreement to avoid the truths that might unsettle the bond. The false self thrives in such relationships because they protect its image. It fears the risk of real intimacy. Real intimacy requires exposure. It asks you to be known in your fullness, which includes the messy, unpolished, and raw. Carl Jung believed that genuine connection can only happen between whole selves. As long as the mask remains, love cannot reach the deepest parts of you. To be truly known is to allow yourself to be seen without the performance. The mask feels safe because it is familiar. You have worn it for so long that its weight has become invisible. It shields you from conflict, from judgment, from uncertainty. Comfort becomes the chain that keeps you from questioning it. Familiarity tricks the mind into trust. Even when the mask limits you, it offers predictability. It controls how others see you and reduces the risk of unexpected pain. The false self thrives on this sense of controlled stability. Letting go of the mask feels like stepping into the unknown. You fear the loss of acceptance. You fear the exposure of your unedited self. The comfort of the mask convinces you that safety is better than authenticity. Carl Jung warned that comfort can be a subtle form of captivity. Growth requires discomfort. The true self is found not in the shelter of the mask, but in the willingness to step into spaces where you cannot predict the outcome. The world often rewards the mask more than the truth. Society values roles that are easy to understand and categorize. When you perform well in your role, you receive praise, opportunities, and belonging. The false self feeds on this steady approval. Every compliment becomes confirmation that the mask works. Every reward makes it harder to imagine living without it. You learn to associate authenticity with risk and performance with security. The stage becomes more appealing than the unknown behind it. Social systems are designed to maintain predictability. People prefer the version of you that serves their comfort. When you break character, you disrupt their expectations. This pressure to remain consistent keeps the false self firmly in place. Carl Jung saw this as a collective agreement to avoid depth. If everyone stays in character, no one has to confront the discomfort of realness. But real connection and transformation require breaking the unspoken contract and stepping off the stage. The false self convinces you that love depends on the mask. You fear that if people saw the unfiltered you, they would leave. Belonging feels conditional, so you protect it by hiding anything that might threaten the connection. This fear is powerful because it is rooted in early experiences. As a child, moments of rejection or criticism taught you that certain parts of yourself were unsafe to reveal. The mask became your ticket to remain accepted. Over time, the fear of losing belonging outweighs the desire for authenticity. You tell yourself that closeness built on performance is better than loneliness. The false self thrives in this compromise, keeping you trapped in partial connection. Carl Jung believed that true belonging begins only when you are accepted as your whole self. Anything less is a contract between masks. Dropping the act risks losing shallow acceptance, but opens the door to a deeper, more enduring bond. Shadow work invites you to meet the parts of yourself you have hidden. These are not flaws to erase, but truths to integrate. The false self fears them because they threaten its image, yet they are the key to your wholeness. When you explore the shadow, you confront traits, desires, and memories you once rejected. They feel uncomfortable because they challenge the persona. But in that discomfort lies the truth of who you are beyond the performance. The shadow acts as a mirror, showing the gap between your lived self and your true self. Every disowned part is a fragment of your authenticity. By reclaiming them, you weaken the mask and strengthen the connection to your inner core. Carl Jung believed that embracing the shadow dissolves the illusion of perfection. In its place emerges a fuller humanity, one that is complex, real, and unafraid to be seen. This is the beginning of freedom from the false self. The unconscious speaks in subtle ways. It sends dreams, slips of the tongue, sudden emotions, and moments of unease. These signals bypass the mask and reveal the truth your conscious mind tries to hide beneath the polished image. A recurring dream may hint at a part of you longing for expression. A sudden burst of anger may point to a boundary you have denied. An unexplainable sadness may be the voice of the self you abandoned long ago. Listening to these signals requires patience and honesty. They often feel inconvenient because they disrupt the persona's stability. But each signal is a thread leading back to the authentic self, if you have the courage to follow it. Carl Jung saw the unconscious as a guide to individuation. By respecting its messages, you begin to bridge the gap between the life you perform and the life that truly belongs to you. This is how the false self begins to dissolve. To see through the false self, you must face the contradictions between who you appear to be and what you truly feel. These tensions are uncomfortable because they expose the gap between the life you perform and the life you desire. The mask survives by avoiding these conflicts. It prefers a seamless story, even if it is false. But growth demands you step into the dissonance, holding the truth of your inner world against the image you show the outer one. This confrontation may bring grief for the years spent in performance. It may bring fear of losing what the mask has secured. Yet it also brings the possibility of living without the constant pressure to uphold an identity that is not yours. Carl Jung believed that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to meet it. When you stand in your contradictions without retreat, the false self loses its authority, and the path to authenticity becomes visible. The journey to authenticity begins with choosing environments where you can breathe without performing. These are spaces that welcome the unpolished you, where approval is not a condition for presence, and where silence feels as safe as speaking. Such spaces may be rare at first. They might exist in a friendship, in solitude, or in moments with nature. What matters is that they allow you to show up without adjusting yourself to fit an image or expectation. In these spaces, the nervous system can relax. Without the pressure to impress, you begin to notice parts of yourself that were long hidden. You discover that connection does not require constant effort, but thrives in the freedom to simply be. Carl Jung valued these environments because they allow the true self to emerge naturally. You do not have to tear off the mask in one violent act. You can loosen it gently, letting your real face grow accustomed to the open air. The false self is built to avoid disapproval at all costs. It treats criticism as a threat to survival. To live authentically, you must learn to let others disapprove of you without feeling the ground beneath you disappear. Disapproval will come when you stop performing for approval. People who benefited from your compliance may resist your change. Their discomfort is not proof that you are wrong. It is proof that you are no longer living for their comfort. Allowing disapproval requires anchoring in your own values. When you know what matters to you, the shifting opinions of others lose their power. You stop measuring your worth by their reaction and start grounding it in your inner truth. Carl Jung believed that individuation demands this courage. The self cannot emerge fully while chained to the fear of rejection. Freedom comes when you can hear no from the world and still offer a steady yes to yourself. Living in alignment means your actions, words, and values flow from the same source. There is no constant editing to please others. There is no inner debate about what is safe to show. Life feels lighter because you are no longer divided. This liberation is not about perfection. It is about congruence. When your outer life reflects your inner truth, energy once spent on maintaining the mask becomes available for creativity, connection, and genuine joy that does not depend on performance. Alignment also brings clarity. Decisions become simpler because they are guided by authenticity rather than fear. You know what fits your path and what does not. You stop chasing what looks good and start choosing what feels true. Carl Jung saw alignment as a natural outcome of individuation. When you integrate every part of yourself, there is no need to hide. You become whole, and from that wholeness, you meet the world without disguise or apology. Returning to your true self is not a transformation into someone new. It is a homecoming to what was always there. Beneath the layers of performance and adaptation, Your essence has been waiting, unchanged, patient, and ready to be lived. This homecoming is an act of truth. It requires you to see the mask clearly and to acknowledge the role it played. Gratitude for its protection can coexist with the decision to no longer let it define who you are. When you live from this place, authenticity becomes your compass. You no longer ask permission to be yourself. You no longer trade pieces of your soul for temporary approval. Your life begins to reflect the depth and wholeness within. Carl Jung reminded us that individuation is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming real. And to become real is to return to the self that existed before the world taught you to hide. Individuation is often misunderstood as self-improvement. Carl Jung taught that it is not about adding layers but removing them. It is the slow unveiling of the authentic self that has been present from the very beginning of your life. The false self thrives on constant adjustment to match expectations. Individuation moves in the opposite direction. It asks you to shed what does not belong, to release roles that no longer serve, and to stand in the truth of your own nature. This process is not glamorous. It is deeply human. It may be quiet, even invisible to the outside world, but inside, it is the most profound liberation you can know. It is the end of pretending and the beginning of truly living. To be real is to walk into the world without the armor of the mask. It is to meet each moment from the fullness of who you are. Jung's reminder is simple. You are not here to be perfect. You are here to be whole.